Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiriduluali. The headlines. Kyiv's central district rocked by blasts this morning and for the second time in this week. President of Ukraine reports heavy fighting around two Donbas towns. And Belarus's defense ministry says Minsk is to host just under 9,000 Russian troops. We begin with news just coming out of the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv, where at least 5 explosions were heard this morning, with the presidential advisor blaming kamikaze drones sent by Russia. Andriy Yermak, head of Ukrainian President Zelensky's office, says this shows Russian desperation. Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said residential buildings in the central Shevchechimsky area had been damaged. The capital was hit by Russian missiles at rush hour last week, part of nationwide attacks which left 19 people dead. The explosions, that is this latest explosions, began around 6:30 local time, and there were at least 5 in total, the most recent being around 10 after 8. 2 were close to the city center, with sirens and car alarms heard across the area. Writing on the Telegram social media site, Mr. Klitschko said there were explosions in the same district as the Shevchechimsky district, which was hit by several strikes last week. He said rescuers were on site where a fire had broken out and told residents to stay in air raid shelters. And the local governor of Belgorod says no residents of the region had been killed or injured in an attack that saw the death of 11 people. But later on Sunday, he announced that 3 people had been injured during missile attacks on the same city. 11 people had been killed in an attack by gunmen at the Russian military training ground. State-owned news agency, the RIA, reported that during a firearms training session, 2 men opened fire on a group who had volunteered to fight in Ukraine. The Russian ministry, that's the defense ministry, said attackers were from a former Soviet republic but did not give further details. They were also shot dead during the incident in the Belgorod region of Russia, which borders on Ukraine. A further 15 people were wounded. In the meantime, shelling by Ukrainian forces have damaged the administration building in the city of Donetsk. The capital of the Donetsk region, Russian-backed administration of the city, said the main entry into the building was hit and several nearby cars damaged. According to Alexei Kolimzin, it was a direct hit. The building is seriously damaged. It's a miracle nobody was killed, and that's the main thing. And that's according to the head of the Russian-backed administration in Donetsk. There's been no immediate reaction from Ukraine to the attack. Donetsk has been controlled by the Russian-backed Donetsk People's Republic since 2014. Russia moved in September to annex the Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia regions of Ukraine, in the biggest expansion of Russian territory in at least half a century. Moscow declared the annexations after holding what it called referenda in occupied areas of Ukraine. Western governments, as well as Kyiv, said the votes breached international law and were coercive and non-representative. Ukrainian servicemen have refitted captured Russian tanks in the Kupiansk district of the Kharkiv region, preparing them for use in future battles. Video footage shows servicemen checking the conditions of the captured tanks, cleaning them, marking them with Ukrainian signs, and camouflaging them with tree branches. The soldiers say they will fight on with them and inflict maximum damage to the Russian troops who came to their land. The Ukrainian army retook Kupiansk in mid-September in a lightning counteroffensive and continues to push further east into the Luhansk region. And the defense ministry in Minsk, that's in Belarus, says just under 9,000 Russian troops would be stationed there as part of, quote, a regional grouping of forces to protect its borders. Valery Revenko, head of the Defense Ministry's International Military Cooperation Department, says the first troop trains with Russian servicemen who are part of the regional grouping began to arrive in Belarus. The relocation is expected to take several days. The total number will be a little less than 9,000 people. That's a quote. He adds that more information would be provided at a briefing for military attachés. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko said last week that his troops would deploy with Russian forces near the Ukrainian border, citing what he said were threats from Ukraine and the West. Billionaire Elon Musk says his rocket company SpaceX would continue to fund its Starlink internet service in Ukraine, citing the need for, quote, good deeds, a day after he said it could no longer afford to do so. Mr. Musk tweeted that even though Starlink is still losing money and other companies are getting billions of taxpayer dollars, we'll just keep funding Ukraine government for free. Mr. Musk said that SpaceX could not indefinitely fund Starlinks in Ukraine. The service has helped civilians and military stay online during the war with Russia. Although it is not immediately clear whether Mr. Musk's change of mind was in fact genuine, he later appeared to indicate it was. When a Twitter user told him, no good deed goes unpunished, he replied, even so, we should still do good deeds. The billionaire has been in online fights with Ukrainian officials over a peace plan he put forward, which Ukraine says is too generous to Russia. He had made his remarks about funding after a media report that SpaceX had asked the Pentagon to pay for the donations of Starlinks. Both SpaceX and the Pentagon have not commented. Britain's Finance Minister Jeremy Hunt says he would show investors that he will repair the country's public financing after the original economic plans of Prime Minister Liz Truss triggered around a market rout. Mr. Hunt told an interviewer that no government could control the markets and no chancellor should seek to do that, but that he plans to, quote, show the markets and the world that the government could account for its spending. In the meantime, Mr. Hunt has insisted Liz Truss is still in charge of the government after a series of U-turns left her premiership in jeopardy. Some Tory backbenchers have been talking privately about how to remove the Prime Minister after market turmoil led her to abandon her flagship tax policies. Mr. Hunt urged the party to unite behind her as the pair held crunch talks to trash out plans on tax and spending. But 3 Tory MPs have since broken cover and called for Ms. Truss to go. Mr. Hunt replaced Kwasi Kwarteng on Friday after the former chancellor was fired following financial turbulence in the wake of last month's mini-budget and a backlash from a number of MPs in his party. A key test of the government's moves so far will come when markets reopen later on today, with ministers facing a nervous wait to see if the rise in UK government debt costs over recent weeks continue. US President Joe Biden says he is not the only one who thought British Prime Minister Liz Truss' original economic plan, which has led to a steep dive in the value of the pound, was a mistake. He told reporters during a stop at an ice cream shop over the weekend in Oregon as he helped campaign for Tina Kotek, who is running for governor of Oregon, that the White House had refrained from commenting on Ms. Truss's problems. And when asked about the strength of the US dollar, Mr. Biden said he wasn't concerned about the strength of the dollar, he was concerned about the rest of the world. Let's see if we can talk now to Ambassador Joseph Ayalogo, former Nigerian ambassador to Switzerland and the United Nations in Geneva. He joins us virtually. Ambassador, thank you for your time. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Morning.
Let's start off with what is the situation now. When last I spoke to you, there were those who were still a bit hopeful, optimistic even, that there would be some kind of breakthrough in negotiations. But let's start off with one of the players, the big players. China held a once in 5 years Congress over the weekend, at which its president, Xi Jinping, was confirmed for a 3rd term in power. So what does that say about no changes, continuity in the world's 2nd largest military and economic power?
Well, it's interesting. Yes, like you said, no change. So we already know the direction of their policy, and we should expect that it would continue. especially when we hear some strong words in regard to its relations with its neighbor, Taiwan. So that's the situation.
Let's come to the West now. When last I spoke to you, winter was quite far away, but now it's much, 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 much nearer. In some places, actually, it has arrived. But the energy crisis is what is on the front burner for Europe at the moment. Some of the countries are already experiencing significant difficulties in attempts to tackle this. So I want to ask you about that. In the case of the UK, of course, we've seen what has happened with the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, being fired and a new Chancellor trying to restore order to the markets. But what do you think is the situation? Do you think Europe is going to get through this energy crisis without a break in its ranks in terms of support for Ukraine?
Well, that's an interesting question. Definitely the energy challenge, the potential impacts, especially during this winter period, is there, and they all know it. It has actually affected internal politics seriously, as for instance, in the UK, where the Prime Minister is still struggling to do whatever has to be done in spite of relieving Kwarteng of his duties. Whether the crisis or the energy crisis will cause a split in ranks of the NATO and the European Union, it's difficult to say. There are indications it might, but
we seem to have lost Ambassador Ayalogo, so we'll take a break and see if we can use that time to reconnect with him. So after the break, who blinks first? NATO and Russia to hold planned nuclear exercises as tensions over Ukraine remain high. Details in a moment. Please stay on with us. Welcome back to the program. I understand that we have now Ambassador Joseph Ayalogo, former Nigerian ambassador to the United Nations and Switzerland, rejoining us virtually. He's in Vienna, Austria. Ambassador, thank you for your time and for rejoining us.
Thank you.
You were making a point about whether the energy crisis could lead to a division of European unity over support for Ukraine.
Yes, I was trying to say that potentially, well, the energy challenge is quite critical. It could potentially lead to a breaking of ranks. But the point is that overridingly, the European countries are fully aware of the very serious challenge that the Russian aggression poses, both to themselves and the global community. And one hopes that they will find a way of riding out the energy crisis, which they are all doing in various ways, and continue pressing to ensure that Russian aggression will come to an end through, hopefully, Russia withdrawing its forces.
But that doesn't seem to be imminent. Rather than withdraw its forces, Russia has embarked on what some have described as fairly indiscriminate attacks right across Ukraine. In the last week alone, it has sent in more missiles into the various Ukrainian cities than at any other time, bar the start of the invasion of Ukraine. And it says that is in retaliation for what it described as Ukrainian sabotage on the Crimean Bridge. And in any case, it does appear as if the ammunition and arming of both sides is going on. So it doesn't seem as if what you said at the end, which some would describe as optimistic, would actually happen anytime soon.
Well, time is of essence, but we can't put a finger on time, especially as the aggressor who has responsibility to withdraw is not defeated yet, doesn't want to accept defeat, is not convinced that it should withdraw or that it is engaging in a fruitless and dangerous exercise. So sadly, we probably would see a prolongation. Definitely, we are not getting what we all hope that would be an outcome, optimistically, that is to see the war end. Sadly, I would say, because as you observed, there has been a lot of escalation. This morning, so many missiles were flown into the capital, Kyiv, and that would, if we go by what the Ukrainians have said, put as their commitment, they will continue this fight and they will not give up. We have a difficulty here, definitely.
There is something else. At a point in time during this crisis, that was described as what could happen when diplomacy was allowed to triumph. And I'm talking about the grain deal brokered by the United Nations and Turkey between Russia and Ukraine. Now, that grain deal is very close to expiration because it was supposed to be for 120 days in the first instance, subject to renewal. Now, given the situation, it doesn't seem as if particularly the Russians are in any mood to extend that. They're going to resume their blockade of Ukraine's ports and prevent any grains from going out, if what we have heard so far is to be believed. That would mark something significant, not just for the two combatants and their supporters, but for the rest of the world.
That's right. Yes, I agree with you. We had hoped that, first of all, that the grain deal would mark the beginning of a series of other diplomatic deals that will lead to a de-escalation of the crisis of the war. It hasn't so far, and we are looking straight into the possibility of the grain deal even stopping with its consequences, negative consequences to the global food needs. One would just hope that at least the grain deal will continue, will be renewed, and so that will reduce the pressure, the challenge on the food requirements of the world.
Do you have any fears that, as has been said, the Russians may, in fact, use what is described as a low-grade nuclear weapon if they feel that they are not on the offensive in this war?
Well, there is that possibility, and it's growing stronger. We do not, the rhetorics indicate that it would happen. The determination of Russia, Putin, to continue the pursuit of this war to its logical conclusion, the way they see it, that is the capitulation of Ukraine. And any attempt by Ukraine to repel their forces seem to inflame or create a backlash. Faces more crossing the defeat. They could resort to nuclear war, the use of nuclear weapons, and Putin has said that severally, even though the NATO, the West, and other countries have warned against it, warned about the consequences. I think we should go beyond rhetorics on this matter and send a message that there's no way at all that nuclear weapons should be used. It has to be made loud and clear to Putin.
Indeed. Ambassador Ayalogo, thank you so very much for your time and for your perspective this morning. And good luck with your deliberations in Vienna.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that heavy fighting continues around two towns in Ukraine's Donbas region, Soledar and Bakhmut. The key hotspots in Donbas are Soledar and Bakhmut, according to the president, who was speaking during his nightly video address. Heavy fighting is going on there. The town of Bakhmut has been the next target of Russia's armed forces in their slow advance through the Donetsk region since taking the key industrial towns of Lysychansk and Severodonetsk in June and July. Solidar lies just to the north of Bakhmut. In his evening address, Mr. Zelensky also encouraged Ukrainians to reduce their electricity consumption. Meanwhile, Ukrainian military organizations, as part of the seized Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, is controlled by armed Chechen forces. The forces in question, the so-called Special Rapid Response Unit, Akhmat, are led by a close ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin, the Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov. The Center of National Resistance said in a statement that, quote, it is known that a part of the station was recently being controlled by a Kadyrov gang, which placed equipment and weapons directly in the turbine halls 1 and 2. The center is a military organization designed to support and coordinate Ukrainian troops. In its statement, the Center of National Resistance also claimed that Russia is trying to connect the Zaporizhzhia NPP to its power system as soon as possible. Israel's Minister of Diaspora Affairs, Nachman Shai, is calling for the supply of arms to Kyiv, claiming that Iran is reportedly transferring ballistic missiles to Russia. According to him, there is no longer any doubt where Israel should stand in the conflict, tweeting that the time has come for Ukraine to receive military aid. Israel is already supplying Ukraine with non-lethal aid, including military equipment and allegedly missile defense systems supplied via the private sector. The claim that Iran was supplying Russia with ballistic missiles was made in a newspaper report by officials from a U.S. allied country that closely monitors Iran's weapons activity. These officials claimed in August that Iran was supplying Shahid series and Mohajer 6 drones to Russia for use in Ukraine, and told reporters that Iran would be sending over, quote, dozens more Mohajer 6s and a larger number of Shahid 136Ss. NATO and Russia are set to separately hold long-planned exercises of their nuclear forces at a time of huge tension as Russia continues its war on Ukraine. The Pentagon and U.S. intelligence community are watching for any unexpected or unusual movements of Moscow's nuclear weapons during Russia's exercise, which is expected to take place before the end of the month, according to several U.S. officials. Quote, we believe that the Russian nuclear rhetoric and its decision to proceed with this exercise while at war with Ukraine is irresponsible. Brandishing nuclear weapons to coerce the United States and its allies is irresponsible. That's according to a senior defense official. The Russian exercise called Grum, which roughly translates into thunder, is conducted every year, according to the U.S. We anticipate the exercise will span several days, and it will include actions within normal bounds of what Russia has done in the past. It will include live missile launches and a deployment of strategic assets, according to the coordinator for strategic communications at the National Security Council, Mr. John Kirby. Let's talk now to Uchechukwu Arinze, senior engineer, nuclear security and non-proliferation expert. He joins us virtually from Enugu in Nigeria. Good morning to you, Mr. Arinze. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yes, let's look at this nuclear issue, the non-proliferation and all of that. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is what has brought all this to the front of national and international discussions. And various countries around the world try to prepare themselves in case of fallouts. Now, do you think, first of all, that the way, because I remember the last time we had you on the program, you gave us a very detailed description of that plant and the fact that it may not be as vulnerable as most people think it is at first. Given what has happened between then and now, do you still think that your assessment is quite on the money?
Oh, thank you. Well, actually, given the current evolving threat and developments in Ukraine over its confrontation with Russia, the risk of a nuclear escalation is possible. even though the facility actually is robust and resilient in its design, incorporating a lot of safety and security features to mitigate any adversarial attack. But there's room for cautious optimism in terms of our perception, or rather interpretation of ongoing events, given the fact that Russia is currently in a tight situation with a lot of losses in the battlefield, necessitating the additional mobilization of hundreds of thousands of troops, international opposition, and domestic resistance and protests across cities in Europe, in Russia. It will necessitate Russia going to the extreme by using its tactical nuclear weapons for the time being, because the possibility of them using strategic nuclear weapons, that is long-range nuclear weapons, actually for now is not feasible, because even though the U.S. Nuclear alert system, that's the NORAD, and DEFCON, that is defense readiness condition, is at level 2. So we are not looking at the possibility of Russia actually using its strategic nuclear weapons in order to turn the situation around, but they can possibly deploy their tactical nuclear weapons. By tactical nuclear weapons, we mean those weapons that have short-range impact. They don't go. Their delivery system is designed to target a particular area that is not remotely placed, that is not too far. So we are looking at Russia possibly detonating its tactical nuclear weapon in some of the areas they lost to Ukraine, such as the Snake Island in the Black Sea area. So it's a possibility. And the Zaporizhia nuclear plant actually currently is under constant monitoring by IAEA inspectors that are on site. And we are monitoring developments, and we believe that Russia may decide to escalate the situation based on its military doctrine that is set out on escalate to de-escalate. That is, they can use any means possible, including the use of strategic and tactical nuclear weapons, to defend itself if it is under threat. Thank you.
Now, let me ask you. There's been a lot said about the explanation you've just given now, and the difference between strategic and tactical nuclear weapons. You've explained the difference now, which presupposes that those who are in countries that are far off from the theater of conflict, countries like Nigeria, for example, currently may not have much to fear in the case of a use of the strategic tactical nuclear weapons, particularly the tactical nuclear weapons. Am I correct?
Actually, nuclear warfare is not like the conventional warfare that we normally know, that uses guns and artillery systems and the like. Nuclear warfare is a different kettle of fish altogether. It's a very dangerous warfare to engage in. Whenever any nuclear detonation occurs, whether it is tactical or strategic, we are looking at possible consequences such as a blast occurring. The blast can speed up wind system to about approximately 1,000 kilometers per hour. That's at the speed. It can generate heat up to 200 million degrees Celsius, totally vaporizing anything within the vicinity of the detonation, and then generating electromagnetic pulse that will totally knock off any electronic equipment, computers. The media houses will be knocked off, power grids, including medical equipment, and then even people that depend on medical equipment for their survival, like cardiac pacemakers, all of them will go off. And then television, radio, or anything electronic, and affecting government, disrupting government operations, and a whole lot of things. And then you talk about ionizing radiation, whereby it will release a huge amount of atomic particles like alpha particles, beta particles, gamma rays, electrons and neutrons into the atmosphere, causing radiological consequences that have stochastic and deterministic impacts, leading to acute radiation syndrome that can lead victims to start vomiting blood, and then nausea, diarrhea, and other problems like that. And then you talk about radioactive fallout. Radioactive fallout is the cloud plume that rises in the skies and with soot and dust particles, and then after some time it descends to the earth and then contaminating a very large area. And then you talk about firestorms and then climate change, which will lead to partial blackout of the sun, shortening of growth period for crops, crop failure, and nuclear famine. These are some of the effects of nuclear explosion, whether it's strategic or tactical nuclear weapons. And then you talk in the present scenario, the radioactive fallout will cover not only Russia or Ukraine areas far into the east as we go eastward, and then to the westward, west direction, the whole continental Europe is at risk. Even parts of North Africa will be affected. So we shouldn't have this sense of complacency about what is going on in Ukraine. It calls for global concerted effort to get Putin to make sure he doesn't try to use nuclear weapons in order to resolve the Ukraine issue.
Finally, I want to ask you before I let you go, what do countries like ours do? What can we do to prepare our citizenry and the country at large for the possible fallout, which you have explained in detail? What are the things? I know that in the case of Ukraine and even in Russia, they were distributing, I believe it's called iodine tablets or something like that. What do those do? Are we supposed to also think about that here?
Thank you. Unfortunately, Nigeria, with a population of about over 200 million people, we don't have any single radiation shelter in place. The radiation shelters are accommodation or safety hideouts during radioactive fallout. So people hide in those structures that they are well designed to withstand any radiological consequences. Second, we doesn't have a central coordinating agency for risk mitigation in terms of nuclear and radiological weapons detonation. Currently, the Nigerian government, working with in concert with the European Union Center of Excellence in Chemical, Biological, Radiological, Nuclear, and Explosives, that's CBRNE, is intensifying effort. We're almost close to rounding up drafting the National Action Plan on risk mitigation for nuclear and radiological, as well as other risks that may occur, given the changing landscape of the threat we are seeing. Because currently, even we have domestic terrorists, so we need to have a sort of a robust architecture to deal with such kind of emerging security issues. This is one of the lacunas in our security architecture. In terms of administering potassium iodide to actually attenuate the effect of radiological contamination, it doesn't actually solve the problem, because what such pills does is the system uses iodine to prevent the occurrence of thyroid disease. So if you administer potassium iodide in the case of a radiological contamination, you are trying to sort of prevent the body from taking in the contaminated iodine in the atmosphere. So it gives a sort of temporary solution to the problem, but it doesn't actually solve it totally. So we need to actually look for a kind of a permanent solution to the problem, which is has to do with building radiation shelters, setting up a central coordinating agency for CBRNE risk mitigation, and possibly if people creating a sort of awareness and advocacy campaign on what people should do whenever radiological events occur. If you are outside, you quickly look for a shelter in place to hide, cover your nose and your mouth to avoid inhalation and the ingestion of radiation effects. And then if you are indoors, you shut the windows and doors, and then probably look for the basement portion of the building and stay there until the government notifies that it's safe to come out. And then you avoid taking food and water that is not properly kept in a safe place, because it might be contaminated. And we are also talking about in terms of emergency preparedness and response. This issue actually calls for the government to be serious about emergency preparedness and response. Currently in Nigeria, the Nigerian Nuclear Regulatory Authority, which is the regulatory body for nuclear activities, has a team in charge of emergency preparedness and response with regards to nuclear and radiological emergencies. And then they work also in concert with NEMA, that's the National Emergency Management Agency, and the Red Cross and the Red Crescent and other humanitarian bodies. But in the case of huge or a sort of a large-scale radiological emergency, I'm sure that we don't have the capacity to handle the consequences. So we need to work in that direction by establishing a central coordinating agency in concert with the European Union Center of Excellence for CBRNE risk mitigation, and then we will be in a place to actually get adequately prepared to handle such kind of emergencies. Thank you.
Indeed, Engineer Uchechukwu Arinze, this is a very grim topic. This is a very unusual topic for Nigerians to be discussing, and I'm happy that you were able to tackle it adequately. Thank you for your time and for the vital information that you have put out there this morning. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And still to come after the break, Australian climate change activists glue their hands to a Picasso painting. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. And so Ini John McQuad joins us on this Monday morning.
Good morning.
As if they weren't already cheap enough, attractive enough, the Russians are making their petroleum products even more appealing.
Yes, more appealing because they need the revenue. Because they need the revenue, we see more sanctions. We've seen more negative sentiments, you know, among the Western countries and all of that. I mean, when you talk of oil, I think they can mostly do without it. It's the gas that is the major thing. Issue. So it's the oil that Russia is actually pushing forward now, and they're reducing as much as $30 for a barrel. I mean, I don't want to...
I don't know how many countries could compete with that.
Yes, $30, that's a whole lot. And so we see more countries going in. I think we have, you know, we normally would talk about India and China. Now you have a whole lot of people. You have Sri Lanka, you have Pakistan. We talked about Afghanistan the other time. You have Cuba, you have Bangladesh. You have a lot of emerging countries who are looking for cheap oil.
And I mean,
In these days of inflation, and high surging energy costs, who wouldn't want a cheap
yeah,
oil?
and we have talked about the Russian financial engineering being top-notch within this crisis. Somehow they have managed to keep the economy going.
Yeah, I guess this is better if they sell it cheap. Remember when we talked about the gas that they are wasting, the flaring, they're supposed to go to the European country. I mean, that's going even without them making any money.
Any money at all.
If they do minus, and as of this morning, oil prices are surging because China is beginning to come back from its COVID restrictions and all of that. So that's placing pressure on demand, and that's now making oil to surge at least a little bit. So even when they reduce 30% from $90-something, you may not really feel it. They
may not really feel it because
exactly.
I mean, if you've projected on the base of a particular amount and all of that.
Exactly.
Now let's take a look at ASEAN. ASEAN is a group, an economic group essentially of Southeast Asian countries.
Yes.
Why are we focusing on Myanmar?
Because they are like Turkey now. They're in the middle of the deep blue sea and the devil. I think that's how we put it. So Myanmar, of course, is part of ASEAN. ASEAN, some of the, in fact, that bloc now they are not as united as they used to be, even though history has it that they've never been as united as, let's say, for instance, the EU. Just like ECOWAS, we want to be united, but we're not really united and all of that. Now there's a further break in between because some countries there are supporting Russia, some are supporting the West. So that has brought a divide. Now Myanmar, because Myanmar has signed a deal with Russia to have a nuclear weapon, to help them build a nuclear. Now the Southeast countries, Southeast Asian, are supposed to be nuclear free. But Myanmar has signed a deal. And you know, Russia, I mean...
they want to get in the middle of that.
Anything to piss the West off, they are in for it. So they're now divided, and analysts are saying that that region, I mean, may not really be existing as it used to exist before, because if, for instance, Myanmar goes ahead and they've not indicated that they are not going to go ahead with the agreement for Russia to help them with nuclear. Russia is anxious to even use the nuclear anyway, at least to show their fight that way.
That is not limited to any number of people.
Exactly.
Anybody can get it.
So if they go ahead with that, and then in a region that is supposed to be nuclear free or war free and all of that, and then you have some of the countries supporting Russia, and of course you can be sure that the West, the US, for instance, will get involved once they hear
that Russians are involved,
yes,
or Russia is
and
involved.
Nuclear is involved. You know, the West will get involved. So it's a threat. The war is really threatening the existence of that association, which doesn't look like it will survive, you know, the war at all.
Myanmar is an unusual country, of course. Myanmar also has very good relations with China.
Yes.
Incidentally.
Exactly.
And China has...
And I think they also voted against the war.
Indeed.
You understand? So that's why I said they're between the devil and the deep blue sea. So...
And they're in an organization which ordinarily would be seen as wanting to be neutral.
Exactly.
Having good trade relations with everybody.
With everybody, both the West, because I think they do import and exports from both the West.
Of course.
And then they do deals with Russia and all of that. And so I hope they, well...
we'll just have to wait and see how all of this pans out. But Ini, thank you. There'll be more, of course, on these links. And there are several of these links that most people may not be aware are there. And of course, you can trust Ini and her team to bring that to you. There's Business Morning right after this show and Business Incorporated later in the day. Thanks, Ini.
Thank you so much.
And We'll just take a look at some of the sports news before we go. Dakar Rally winner Sergei Karakin has called on Formula One's governing body, the FIA, to scrap the hurdles preventing Russian drivers from participating in FIA-sanctioned events. The Russian, who won the fabled Dakar event in the quad category in 2017, has written personally to new FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem. In the letter, he asked the FIA chief to scrap the requirement, demanding that Russian drivers condemn the actions of President Vladimir Putin over the Ukraine conflict. If the answer is no is not to Karakin's liking, the 32-year-old insists he will sit out the 2023 Dakar Rally, which is scheduled to be held in Saudi Arabia in December. Dynamo Football Club has presented a hovercraft to the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine. Senior officials of the club visited the border guards and presented them with the gift. The soldiers of the State Border Guard decided to name the new airship as Dynamo. The hovercraft will become a reliable assistant for the protection and defense of Ukraine's borders. And finally on the program, two Extinction Rebellion activists glued their hands to a Pablo Picasso painting in Melbourne, Australia, to convey the connection between the consequences of climate change and human suffering. They stood with their hands stuck to the protective covering of Picasso's masquerade career, with a banner reading "Climate chaos equals to war plus famine" on the floor in front of them at the National Gallery of Victoria. The Extinction Rebellion said in a statement that, quote, "The painting represents the suffering of war. We need to be thinking about how this type of suffering will increase and how the societal breakdown the scientists are telling us is coming will eventually put all of us in the firing line." And that's where we wrap up the program this morning. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akeredoluale. There's update on this crisis and war, whatever you want to call it, throughout the day on our various news bulletins, and particularly at 5 o'clock within the world today. For now, do have yourselves a good start to the week. Good morning.